Welcome to the France 24 debate. We're looking at the fallout after the firing of Jeff Sessions. Now, he's been the subject of the wrath of President Trump almost since he was appointed by him. Yes, President Trump appointed him in February last year. Then Sessions recused himself over the investigation of Trump and links to Russia. And perhaps that was the beginning of the end for Sessions. So where does it go from here? Will the Mueller inquiry, will that be stymied? Some say it might even be ended. Or has the focus long been lost? So should it be brought to a close? I can only just scratch the surface, but our guests will take us towards a better understanding of what might happen next and certainly appreciation of what this all means. So let's bring them in straight away. Our guests here in the studio, William Jordan, former US State Department official. Thank you, sir, for being with us. On the other side of our studio, Mark Porter, who is president of Republicans Overseas France. Mark, thanks for joining us. Joining us by satellite from Lancaster, which is in the good old northwest of England, Richard Johnson is a lecturer in US politics and international relations. Richard, thanks for being with us. And joining us by satellite from Washington, D.C., Molly McHugh, foreign policy consultant and information warfare expert. Molly, thanks for being with us. Now, you four, please bear with us. Let's have this scene-setting report made here at France 24 by Erin Agunki.
It's the dark cloud that's been hanging over Donald Trump's presidency. Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into collusion between the 2016 Trump campaign and the Kremlin. Since Mueller started the probe in 2017, his team has indicted or obtained guilty pleas from more than 24 individuals and 3 companies. Among the most detrimental for Donald Trump, Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor who pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI, as well as Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chair. Manafort was found guilty of 8 charges of financial crimes before agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors. And after pleading guilty to 8 felonies, Donald Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, also agreed to cooperate with Mueller's team. But with the firing of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the future of Mueller's probe has been thrown into question. President Trump named Sessions' chief of staff, Matthew Whitaker, as acting Attorney General, setting off alarm bells for Democrats.
Given his record of threats to undermine and weaken the Russia investigation, Matthew Whitaker should recuse himself from any involvement in Mueller's investigation. Congress must take immediate action to protect the rule of law and integrity of the investigation.
As acting Attorney General, Whitaker will have the power to limit Mueller's authority, reduce the budget of the probe, or order him to end certain parts of the investigation. But Whitaker could only fire Mueller for misconduct, conflict of interest, or other reasons of good cause. Democrats, however, have made their position clear. They have warned there will be consequences should President Trump attempt to impede the investigation.
And thanks to Erin Agunki for that very clinical assessment of the situation. Let's start here, though, in the studio with Mark Porter from the Republicans to give us something about Jeff Sessions. Now, Trump never seemed to have a good word to say about Sessions. What can you tell us about?
True.
Well,
that's not true.
Fill us in. Tell us more then.
No,
because all I ever picked up in reports was criticism.
Well, I remember when Jeff was nominated, it was appointed, and I was sitting right here, and everybody was calling him racist and all these things because he had a Southern accent. So all sorts of things get out of proportion all the time. But Jeff Sessions helped the president quite a lot by being the first senator to step up and support his presidency. Trump did something extraordinary. Well, he's done a lot of things extraordinary, but he started his campaign in Mobile, Alabama. This is an odd place for a Republican to start a campaign. Normally, Alabama's a red state. It doesn't really need a lot of campaigning out there. But Trump started in Mobile because Sessions had suggested that he began to reach out to conservatives. We have to remember that Trump was a Democrat before. Trump was a Hillary supporter. He gave her tons of money. He knew her strategy and all these things and thought it was wrong and decided to run for president himself. And Jeff helped him do that. So they have a long history. They have 2 different personalities, and that's clear, and everybody can see that. Jeff Sessions is a Boy Scout in the best use of the term. He follows the rules. He has been excellent all of his career in prosecuting KKK members, and all of these things that he's done, it's excellent for the state of Alabama, and he's been a great Attorney General in Washington.
Okay, Mark, let me pause. Let me bring in William to talk a bit more about that. You can get back later, of course.
Sure.
Well, no, I'm not going to take away from a lot of what Mark just said. I mean, the point is, there's a certain element of tragedy to this in the sense that, yes, indeed, Jeff Sessions was one of the very first people in the Congress to speak up on behalf of Donald Trump's presidency and to help him a great deal. And he played a key role in the campaign. To me, one of the things that's sort of fascinating about this is the degree to which, since Jeff Sessions is a lawyer, and he's also a longtime Paul in Washington, two things that Donald Trump is not or was not. And when the time came to make an ethical decision in terms of what to do following the firing of James Comey, and what to do about these lingering allegations of some kind of collaboration, with the Russians or others out there, Jeff Sessions decided, when the decision was made to appoint a special counsel in the form of Robert Mueller and to set up that investigation, to recuse himself, because he felt that, as Mark was just saying, as a good Boy Scout, he needed to do the right thing.
The right thing to
as
do.
far as his being an attorney, an officer of the court, and not to appear to be or not to taint whatever the investigation came up with by seeming to be overly politically involved.
Well, no, that wasn't why he recused himself. He recused himself because he misspoke in the confirmation hearings.
Right.
So he misspoke.
Well, because he was going to be part of the investigation, in terms of whether or not there was any kind of...
But he'd had conversations with the Russian ambassador. That's what it was about, wasn't it?
Right.
How do you remember these things? How many parties do you go to? No, seriously, I go to a lot of parties, and so do you. You meet all kinds of people. Not remembering these things is that he misspoke, and he recused himself of that. Now, that's something that other attorney generals would never do.
In order to finish my point, I just want to say that I think that the problem for Jeff Sessions was that, as far as Donald Trump was concerned, and this is something that people who are either pro or not pro-Trump will disagree on, is he committed the original sin of not standing by the president 100% lock, stock, and barrel when it came to allowing this probe to go forward and to relinquish, or to delegate control over the probe to his deputy. And again, I think that Jeff Sessions thought he was doing the right thing in all of this.
That's true.
And
Donald
Trump didn't. And that's been, I think, at the heart of this.
Let me bring in the other guests. You get back in a moment, Mark. I promise you. Molly McHugh. Can you hear me, Molly McHugh in Washington? Would you say Jeff Sessions is a scapegoat or a whipping boy? Or maybe a bit of both?
I think Jeff Sessions knew exactly what he was getting into when he threw in with the Trump campaign when really none of his colleagues were willing to. I think he did everything that was required of him by this president. He has been very close to his agenda on many points that are extremely controversial that will be debated and unraveled for years to come. But I think that, as the other guests have said, he committed the cardinal sin, which was forgetting that the God Emperor of Washington is the one who must be followed. And this notion, if you look at Sessions' record on paper, he has done everything the White House has asked of him, except not recuse himself from the Mueller investigation so that he could keep control over it. This is clearly what the firing is about. The notion that Sessions misspoke and somehow forgot his meetings with the Russian ambassador, who, if you ever met the previous Russian ambassador, is the least forgettable person you ever would have met.
Oh, that's not true. That's ridiculous to say.
Carry on, Molly,
I'm sure
please.
that your meetings with him would have gone well, but this has always been the only point of disagreement that this president has ever had with Jeff Sessions has been about Russia and the Russia probe. And I think everybody sees that and understands what this is about, and will see very clearly going forward what the steps that have been taken in the last 48 hours are about.
Molly, thank you. Let me bring in Richard Johnson, who's waiting for us in Lancaster. Richard, were you surprised by what happened to Sessions and the way it was handled?
No. Well, I think it's been in the works for some time, but in removing Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump is removing one of the most quietly effective members of his cabinet that he has. That when President Obama was president, through his attorneys general, Eric Holder and then Loretta Lynch, pursued a number of progressive racial policy items, which Sessions has been using his time as Attorney General to reverse quietly, but very effectively. On voting rights, the Justice Department has moved away from defending African-American litigants and Latino litigants against voter ID laws under the Sessions
it's nothing to do with that.
Attorney Generalship. On prosecutions, the Obama administration told federal prosecutors that they didn't need to use the harshest penalties against people who committed certain drug crimes. Jeff Sessions has told them they should use the harshest penalties. In terms of the use of the federal death penalty, that was something that particularly Eric Holder had expressed that he wasn't going to spend his time seeking. Jeff Sessions has said that he wanted that practice to be used again on private prisons. The Obama administration signed an executive order ending the use of private prisons in the federal government. Jeff Sessions has reversed that. And then finally, on policing, the Obama administration, through the Justice Department, was in charge of the investigation of a number of major police forces: Baltimore, Ferguson, Chicago, North Charleston. And the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions quashed those investigations, stopped some of them in midstream, didn't allow some of those reports to be released, which led to even someone like Tim Scott, a Republican, Tea Party Republican from South Carolina, writing to Jeff Sessions, demanding that Sessions release the report about the North Charleston Policing Department when an African-American man was shot in the back as he was walking away.
Oh, come on. Okay, this is too much.
Bear with me.
This is just...
As soon as he finishes, you're in, Mark.
This is over the top.
Richard, finish your point, and then I'll bring in Mark Porter.
So Sessions has been an extremely effective actor in the Justice Department, and I think that Donald Trump will be losing someone who's done a great deal in a short amount of time in his headship of that department.
But he said some pretty horrible things about him via Twitter, didn't he? Richard, thank you. We'll bring you back in a moment. Mark, I know you're dying to get in here now, so the blue touch paper's been lit. Off with the fireworks.
Well, this is ridiculous. He's got a list of things that he's presented them in a way that makes Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions look like they're terrible racists, and that's unexcusable, and that's not very professional on your part. And I am just really sickened by that.
Richard Johnson, I know, is a lecturer, and he's reporting fact as he sees it.
Well, the fact he's manipulated it, and we can go into that in another show if you like, but let's get back to the most important point here. Jeff Sessions has disagreed with the president a lot of times. That's not even the point. The point is that the president has the right to appoint and to ask cabinet members to step aside when he needs to.
Why do it right now, Mark? Why do it right now after the midterms?
It's time to do it. And let me tell you something else. Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, who didn't show up for congressional hearings, this is what this is all about. So your guy up there in Lancaster or wherever he is in England that knows nothing about the United States apparently isn't very clear and waiting to get about what's happened to the other attorney generals and how that they've used the law and bent the law. Trump is extremely frustrated, as so is the rest of America, by how the Obama administration abused the law, using attorney generals that twisted and turned things. So we can make a list of those if you like as well and compare, and Jeff Sessions will come out on top.
Mark, I'm vouching completely for Richard Johnson's credentials. He's an experienced lecturer. He knows his stuff.
Well,
and he knows what he's talking about. So, Richard, quick reply from you, sir, in Lancaster.
I'm just presenting the facts of the Justice Department as I've seen it.
No, you're taking the facts.
Let him finish, please. Let him finish,
them.
please. Let him finish. Go ahead, Richard.
I'm not trying to add a particular value judgment on them, but it's clear that Jeff Sessions has pursued a different course in racial policy than the Obama administration.
He followed the law.
I'm not suggesting he didn't follow the law. I'm just suggesting that he was elected under a different racial policy agenda than
there is no racial policy agenda. It doesn't exist.
Every president.
No, that is not true. And you don't know every president. You can't say that.
Mark, let him finish, please. He's at a disadvantage. He's not here. Go ahead, Richard.
The Justice Department, which was created by the Civil Rights Act of 1870,
I'm aware of that.
Is in charge of racial policy. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department has explicit responsibility for racial policy. Every US president since Ulysses S. Grant has to have a racial policy.
That's not true. That's not a racial policy. You're misusing the word, perhaps.
Racial in the sense of dealing with race.
Gentlemen, let me pause you both there and bring in William Jordan for a take on this one.
Well, what I would say, I mean, I, in a way, agree with both in the sense that, what Mark has said here is that, Jeff Sessions, and I think everybody's pretty much agreed, Jeff Sessions was loyally carrying out the policy of this administration. I mean, he was probably one of the best people to carry out what Trump and the Republican establishment behind him that supported him and wanted him to go in this direction intended to do after 8 years of the Obama administration in terms of either reversing certain policies, whether they had to do I'm not going to put it in racial terms, but in terms of civil rights issues and in terms of questions having to do with voter laws and things like that, law enforcement, those kinds of things. Jeff Sessions, loyally and faithfully carried out the agenda that was sort of given to him and that he also contributed to. And I agree completely with the point that, I am not going to put it in entirely political terms like Mark did, but I will say that, yes, every attorney general that I've known in my lifetime working for an elected president of the United States has basically carried out whatever the policy and political preferences of that president is. And so, Jeff Sessions was doing that. This issue, however, of the Russia investigation was something that clearly, was neither just a burr in the saddle, it was a major divide between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions that Donald Trump could not get over, and that in the end led to not just a series of insults and difficult positions for Jeff Sessions to be in, but with which he seemed to be prepared to live with in order to see his mandate through. But ultimately, and this is where, we can come back to it, I think there is an important reason for the timing that has a lot to do with the fact that we're in a lame duck period in Congress, and a lot of things are probably going to happen with the Mueller investigation that Congress, which won't come into session in the new configuration until January, will not be able to respond to.
I'd like to bring in Molly for a final comment. Molly, final word on this half from you, please.
I think that's exactly right. I think that this window between the election and when the new Congress comes in the beginning of January is seen as a moment of opportunity for the Trump administration on the investigation. They know that there were more indictments coming down. They know that Mueller is working on his report. They know that those indictments are getting closer to people, closer to Trump personally, to his family, to his children. And I think that there is a very carefully constructed plan underway to be able to address that in a more active and engaged manner, including by removing the Attorney General and putting a new acting one in place. And it's been made clear that Acting Attorney General Whitaker is temporary, that he is basically there for this purpose, and then someone else will be appointed to take over the department. Which is a very dangerous window of opportunity, given that the main credential for this individual, as with so many in this administration, is that they were adamant in defending the president 100% on television prior to being appointed to their job.
Well, recuse, thank you very much indeed. We will be resuming this debate after a very short break and, of course, moving on to discuss more about the implications for the Mueller inquiry. Stay with us. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. We're discussing the implications after the firing of Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General appointed by Donald Trump in February 2017. By March 2017, he'd recused himself over issues related to the Mueller inquiry. Alleged, of course, that Sessions had met with the Russian ambassador, and this might somehow colour the waters for him overseeing this legal process. And he recused himself, which means he basically withdrew, and that was to the anger of Donald Trump. Anyway, now it seems payday came for Sessions, and he's been sacked from his job. We've got four guests here to give you a far better analysis than I could give, and let me introduce them to you again. William Jordan, former US State Department officials. Thank you, sir. On the other side of the studio, Mark Porter, who's president of Republicans Overseas France. Mark, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Two guests joining us by satellite. First, in Washington, Molly McHugh, foreign policy consultant and information warfare expert. Molly, great to see you. And joining us from Lancaster in the good old northwest of England, not too far from where I was born, we have Richard Johnson, lecturer in US politics and international relations. Richard, stay with us, and I hope that smile stays on your face. Let's bring back in Mark Porter from Republicans Overseas here in France. Mark, you were very angry by a number of issues that were raised.
Absolutely.
Please take up where you left off. I mean, clearly, my perspective is that Sessions was always the person that Trump was looking to get at. Many tweets obviously pointing at that. And now the question is, what happens with the Mueller inquiry? Is there a systemic threat to this inquiry now that Sessions has been replaced.
Look, there was no Russian collusion, so there's no problem here. The real thing is, when you said that did Jeff Sessions meet with the ambassador or did he meet the ambassador? That's what tricked him up during the congressional hearings. And that's when he said, I never met with the ambassador. Then some Democratic staffers went and found him at a party and had a photo. He said meeting with him means coming to my office, sitting down and meeting with you. Meeting him by shaking a hand at a party, that's something different. And Jeff said, fine, in the spirit of bipartisanism, in order to calm everyone down, I will recuse myself because the Trump administration didn't do anything wrong. Trump says Democrats don't play like that. And neither apparently up in Lancaster either there. But the idea is that you can't be that soft when you're sitting in a hearings and when you're trying to be Attorney General.
Okay, so why was Donald Trump so angry with Sessions then? Because the way you're painting it, it's actually quite normal or quite equitable. But why was he so angry with him then?
Because Jeff is a good guy. He's a Boy Scout.
Does that apply to Trump?
He follows the room. But look, Trump is saying, look, you can't just make that decision between meeting with or meeting the ambassador. For a lawyer, like you had pointed out, that's very important. That makes a difference. For Trump, Trump is saying, look what Loretta Lynch did. Look what all these other attorney generals have done. We have to win this in order to convince people that you know what you're doing and that we're strong. One of Trump's big problems is being weak, and Democrats are the ones that come in and beat us half to death every time we make a small little donation.
Mark, you're back in a moment. Molly McHugh, you're in, please. Tell us what you think about that. Are you convinced by what you're hearing?
Well, I'm very much enjoying Mr. Porter's whataboutism on just about every issue.
Thank you.
I think this is just nonsense. This issue is not about one word that Jeff Sessions said one way or another in the hearing. The Mueller investigation has been quite detailed, quite thorough, has resulted in a number of indictments that
had nothing to do with Russian collusion.
Please allow
to
Molly
influence
to continue,
our elections. And in fact, in many of those indictments, there have been unnamed American counterparts that are included in those documents, in the indictments of Russian agents and of Russian actors in a variety of categories. The Trump campaign manager has been indicted and pled guilty. His national security advisor has been indicted and pled guilty. Several advisors have been indicted and pled guilty. So this notion that it's all just this big, hollow farce is a really nice talking point that is completely nonsense. We don't know is the truth what is in the remainder of the investigation in other sealed indictments, in other reports that will come out. We know that there is more to come. We've seen shadows of that in the indictments that are out so far, the extent of which Mueller has had access to intercept information, to recorded conversations between some of these actors, including really amazing stuff that they've had on some of the Russian actors. And hints that they've been able to track financial information in ways that nobody thought was possible, including tracing Bitcoin transactions. There's a lot to come yet. So this idea that we all know there's nothing is a complete lie. That is a really nice talking point for conservatives. It is. You don't know.
Absolutely.
Do you know everything that Mueller has? Sure you do, because this is what your job is, to audition for something on television. But the fact is
I don't know
that
what you're talking about. We do know what happened because we know the people that were there. So we believe these people because they're telling the truth. What Mueller has, he's gotten indictments.
But they haven't told the truth. All these people have been indicted for lying. The main crime that people have been convicted of is lying to FBI investigators.
Yes, and
on a number of occasions,
because the questions are being turned around and twisted.
Russians.
Exactly, meeting with or meeting Russians. This is the game that's played in Washington. You know that. You're in D.C.
Carry on, Molly.
No, that is not what I know. Michael Flynn was a highly qualified national security official who omitted meetings with Russians on his security clearance forms, knowing exactly what he was doing. This idea that people just
knowing
got
what he's doing. He said he didn't know what he
was
doing. The idea is
but
that
he should know what he's doing, shouldn't he?
This idea is ridiculous.
He was the head of an intelligence agency.
So he should know what he's doing.
Of course he knows what he's doing.
Molly, thank you. Let me bring in William Jordan here in the studio. Thank you, Molly. We'll be back in a moment.
Well, one of the things I want to throw in on this is that, what has happened here, and I think this is because of the personalized way that Donald Trump has played it. I mean, let's face it, every president, it's like every senior American official who gets investigated in this way, and pushes back, fights back, tries to either claim that Bill Clinton did the same thing. This is a fishing expedition. They're just looking until they find something that they think they can bring charges against me on. Richard Nixon obviously is the example because of Watergate, because of everything that happened related to that, and the parallels to certain efforts to try to squelch the special counsel's or rumors about trying to squelch the special counsel's activities. The parallels are quickly drawn to Watergate. The point is that, to a lot of people watching this, including myself, and I tend to be somebody who tries to, consider these things on a factual basis, you can't help but avoid what inside the Beltway in Washington is called, the Washington Post test. If it's printed in the Washington Post, others would call it the smell test. If it's printed in the Washington Post, as being a possibility, is it something that might actually be serious? And there are a lot of Americans who are looking at all of this and saying, well, there's a lot of smoke here, so somewhere there's got to be some fire. Now, are they leaping to the conclusion that Donald Trump and the people around him did all of these things? Not necessarily. And that's the point of the investigation. By letting it play out, which is what ultimately Jeff Sessions was saying needed to happen, and a lot of Republicans, until very recently, were saying needed to happen. And many of the Republicans who've been saying that will soon be retiring from the Congress and going into the opposition wilderness. They have all been saying, let this play out. It's probably not going to be as bad as folks think, so let the facts come out. Don't impede the investigation. The problem is that politically, that has not sat well with Donald Trump, who feels, and he's been schooled in this from the very beginning of his life as a business person, to fight back at every occasion in which he is threatened. And that's what I think is the dynamic that's playing out here. I mean, again, we don't know, because it hasn't yet been revealed, and we don't know what Mueller. We know what Mueller has done in terms of public actions, but we don't know what the investigation is going to ultimately conclude and ultimately release in the form of some sort of a report with recommendations as to what to do next. We don't know. But the thing is, right now, what appears to be happening is the first part of an effort now to either squelch that investigation or to cut it off at its knees so that it's not going to be able to deliver the conclusions. And that's where you get onto the very slippery slope that both Bill Clinton did when he was president and Richard Nixon certainly did when he was president. And that's the danger, if you will, for Donald Trump. I mean, he seems to be impervious to the recommendations of his lawyers as well as other political advisors to let this play out. Instead, he seems to want to kill it off.
Quick comment from Molly, then I'll bring in Richard. Molly, over to you.
Yeah, I think a really important point that was just raised in that comment is the fact that Trump watched election night in a different way than I think the rest of us did. The president was watching what happened in the Republican caucus, which is, in fact, the retiring of most of the moderates left in the House. In the Senate, many of the moderates that he had not been such a fan of have either retired or lost their races. And the new caucuses that are coming in are much Trumpier, and he knows that. So he knows that while their numbers are diminished, he has a lot of power in the Senate with an expanded caucus that is much more conservative or much more aligned with his values. And he knows that he can use that against the House. So I think he sees the results of the election very differently, which is why you see this movement on the investigation, which bothers him. He's a guy who moves on whatever it is that's keeping him up at night, and it's this right now.
Mark Porter is aching to get in, but before I bring you in, Mark, please stop. I've got to go to Lancaster to Richard Johnson for another perspective. Richard, from where you're sat and from what you're looking at, do you think this Mueller inquiry is under threat?
Well, it could quite possibly be, but thinking about the politics of this week's elections and how that has changed things, I think that the Democrats now are facing really quite a dilemma, because I think that they have to make a choice as to whether or not they make the next 2 years about Russia, or if they are using the House to promote different agenda items. And I think that there's a temptation, based on very strong feeling from Democratic activists, to use the new powers that they have, say, with control of the House Intelligence Committee and so on, to really push hard on this Russia investigation. But, you know, I think that there is a real risk in that approach for the Democrats, that there's no possibility of removing the president unless there really is something truly damaging that's revealed, because there is simply no way that 2/3 of the current Senate would vote to remove the president. And so even if the Democrats somehow symbolically got to move articles of impeachment in the House against the president, all that I think would do would probably be to strengthen him, to present him as a martyr. The acquittal in the Senate would probably present him as evidence that he could then go and say, look, there's nothing here. And, you know, this week the Democrats won these House seats because of their focus on a particular policy issue, which was healthcare, which we didn't hear a huge amount on this side of the Atlantic. But the Wesleyan Media Project, which monitors television adverts, found that half of the Democratic television adverts in this year's election talked about healthcare, and healthcare was the top issue that voters mentioned in exit polls. So I think that the Democrats need to really think about whether or not they see Russia politically as something that's going to help them, or if they should use their new powers to see if they can get some kind of policy concessions on other matters.
Richard Johnston in Lancaster, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about impeachment, William. Is it a possibility?
I hope not.
I know what Mark's going to say.
No, well, I actually hope not. I mean, but you know, again, I think that this investigation, the most critical part of this investigation, in political terms, I'm putting it entirely in political terms, is going to be about the degree to which people, Trump's family members and people around Trump were talking to the Russians. I don't think it's going to be so much, because it will be harder to trace a lot of this back in an indictable way under what the Constitution says you have to bring against a president in order to move articles of impeachment. I don't think that is going to entirely reach all the way up to Donald Trump. Even if it did, I think it's going to be one of those things where, as was just said, 2/3 of the Senate, even if the House in whatever delusional fantasy decided to bring articles of impeachment, would never vote it forward. And personally, I'm of the view that the Democrats need to play a long game, even though it's only 2 years. They need to let Trump be Trump. They need to let Trump continue to outrage people as far as the Democrats are concerned. They need to kind of play up the agony that the administration will have in not being able to push through its agenda because the House is in the Democrats' hands, be seen to be putting forth a more positive agenda, subjecting people to the accountability that has been long overdue in Washington, and then let the voters decide in 2020. In a way, what Trump is counting on is exactly what was outlined, which is to be constantly under attack, constantly under pressure, and through a war of attrition, because he is in the White House, and the incumbent in the White House generally has the advantage going into re-election campaigns, allow the Democrats to basically destroy themselves or wear themselves down by opposing him. So I think that, in a way, they've got to reverse this dynamic and be seen as the ones who, even though they're in sort of the minority or the lesser position, are the ones proposing positive things and forcing the administration and all the people to come back and and reject Trump. But the thing is, what is happening now is that Trump is, manipulating a lot of this to create a crisis, in my view, that will play out over the next 3 or 4 months as Congress is finishing up a very contentious and very dense lame duck session, and then moving into the transition to the next Congress. All of this stuff is going to happen at a time when this will be the big issue, and this is exactly what Trump wants, because he wants this to be at the center stage as opposed to anything else that would actually get the people's business done.
Mark Porter.
Okay, I don't think I disagree with most of that. Well, some important things to remember is
when the word impeach was mentioned, you looked outraged.
Well, I think it's been well discussed here. I think it would be a big mistake for them to move forward just in terms of their own positioning, except for with their base. And of course, a lot of these things that Democrats say are playing to their base. Even Nancy Pelosi said that she would not pursue it. It wasn't worth it. And she didn't think anything could happen.
And Nancy Pelosi said she's concerned about the future of the Mueller inquiry. Are you concerned about the future of the Mueller inquiry?
No, because there's nothing there with the Mueller inquiry, so that will go away. All these other things have been sort of fallout.
Will it be allowed to continue?
Will it be allowed to continue? That's the big question. In fact, that's probably what we should have spent most of our time talking about here tonight.
We've been around it a few times.
Yeah. But this idea of the Mueller investigation, whether or not it continues or not, it will eventually evaporate and disappear. And then where will the Democrats be? They don't have any policies. They don't have any sort of they ran against Trump, and they did quite well. But the Democrats also won because they were very organized. They had a lot of money. I have to congratulate them on an excellent ground game. They really turned out. With the seats that they were defending.
You had lots of money too, though, didn't you?
Not as much as they did, really. I mean, we were trying, but we just couldn't match them. All these Democrat billionaires in Silicon Valley and Hollywood and New York really is making a big difference. But what's also interesting is Trump is not a conservative. So when you look inside the party, the RNC doesn't really consider Trump a conservative. The idea of nominating Kavanaugh came from the Sessions camp, as a matter of fact. So Trump is loyal to those people that help him out and actually can get things done. So that's something that's very important to him. And he does have performance indicators that he does use. And Jeff Sessions, especially by recusing himself over one word, really has frustrated Trump. And I'm quite frustrated tonight, as you've seen. I understand the president a bit more.
I wonder if Sessions thinks he's loyal. It'd be great to put that question to him. Let me bring in Molly McHugh for what might be the final comment here. And Molly, kind of put two things to you, the impeachment idea, but also whether you think the Mueller inquiry will be safe, it will go ahead.
I think in some form or another, the inquiry will probably continue, but I think is nearing a point where the report will have to come out. I think now the focus is on ensuring that some aspect of that report is made, certainly makes its way to the Congress, but some portion of it makes its way to the public so that people see what there has been, what has been found, what has not been found, so that people can make an evaluation of what has been seen. I think on impeachment, it's sort of a nonsensical question. It's obvious that it would be a waste of time. The Senate is not going to impeach this president. And I think the Democrats would be wasting an enormous amount of their legislative capacity to spend time on it. It's not just about rallying the base. There's other issues that are more important, and I think you saw that in this election. Democrats did have a message for people. It was focused on policy issues, and that worked. They were not running against the president very explicitly in many districts. In the places where they won, they were running on, yeah, there's all this noise and this circus that distracts a lot of time, but there's actually a lot of issues we still need to address that relate to you and your families. And I think if they can stay focused on that message, particularly on some of the more interesting dynamics of this election, the fact that you had red states forcing their governments to accept Medicaid expansion and additional aid from the federal government that red state governors had rejected, that's a really big thing. And it echoes what we've seen in red states in the past few years, these sort of teachers' rebellions, sort of arguing against the long-term fiscal responsibility hardline message from red state governors that have been squeezing schools in these states. Now you have a lot of those educators and people who are part of those sort of protest movements in state houses who are looking at education as a priority for services as well. This is a really different dynamic. I think neither party has really captured this well, that there is a shift in the American public about what services they expect to be delivered from their governments. The circus in Washington will continue, but that's never going to be what wins or loses an election. And I think the next 2 years leading up to 2020 will be a really critical time to see how that develops. And the Democrats need to use the House.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you very much indeed. Last word. We've got no time, but I've got to bring you in, Mark. Last word, please. Keep it brief.
Well, I was going to actually say that the point of health care reform is very important, and that is a point where both Democrats and Republicans
That's a new program, isn't it? We could do that one.
Well, we do need to do something, and Trump has been behind doing health care reform, and so this could be one way that we could stay out of all that political mess.
You snatched the political spotlight there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our guests. Media Watch coming up right now. Joining us, Emma James from Media Watch. Good evening to you. Now,
hi there.
Controversy after controversy surrounds Donald Trump, of course, and his dealing with the media in his latest news conference has made many headlines.
Yes.
Much discussion. Please take it away.
Despite the many, many huge issues to be discussed about the US right now, it is this spat from the briefing room yesterday that does still have so many people talking. And it has largely been kept alive by the White House itself. The Guardian reporting that the White House has actually accused CNN reporter Jim Acosta of placing his hands on the young intern who actually tried to take the microphone from his hand as he was asking a question of Donald Trump. Now, I'm sure that everyone now has seen what went on between these two men, but just in case you have missed it, here's a little clip of the kind of stuff that went on yesterday.
Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
that's
I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask.
CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
So there you go. That gives you a little taster of what things were like in the briefing room. It was edited, not doctored at all. Unlike, it's claimed, the video that was tweeted out by Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, today. She said, "We stand by our decision to revoke this individual's hard pass. We will not tolerate the inappropriate behaviour clearly documented in this video." Now, for some reason, it's not playing for you. But anyway, what it does show, or appears to show, is that it's slightly speeded up in places, slowed down in others, to actually make it look as though Jim Acosta's movement was more aggressive than it was.
I've seen the video, and I agree with what you said, and other colleagues of mine who know about technical issues agree with that too. Mark, go ahead.
Well, I have to say that the president has the right to invite any reporter that he wants. Okay, so Jim's behavior was over the top. We have to say that. Okay, it was rude. It was disrespectful, not only to President Trump but to the presidency, the White House itself. So President Reagan also asked.
Thought that the rudeness came from Donald Trump rather than the
that's
reporter.
your people. My people.
No,
saw
my people.
No. I'm just trying to say the other point of view. That's why I'm here, I think.
Absolutely, and a lot of people do say that they felt Jim Acosta's repeated questioning was a bit too much.
The tone,
but then we get back the comment from Donald Trump, which was, "You are the enemy of the people," and CNN received a pipe bomb from somebody who appears to have been inspired by the rhetoric of Donald Trump. And I think that's where people start to get more angry about what the president had to say than perhaps the questioning line from Jim Acosta.
Well, it lies on the other side, too. CNN has provoked a lot of people, and Steve Scalise got shot in a baseball field by a Democrat because of what CNN and...
William, let me just say that I think that as somebody who has been watching the American media in particular for decades, I think that there are problems across the board in how the media, in many ways, in my view, disrespectfully. I mean, the rules of the game have been allowed to slide to the point where people are shouting questions in sometimes the most inappropriate ways at, world leaders who are visiting the President of the United States, children. I mean, any occasion in which the press is present, people are shouting questions. I've actually thought for a long time, that needs to change. Somehow there needs to be some better way of handling this, either more press events involving the president or some understanding that this kind of activity is not called for. I mean, I don't agree that the president has the right to choose who he invites and who he gives accreditation to, but I do think that the press, by the same token, should also show a little bit more respect for not only the office, but the people who visit the office.
Okay. Emma, back to you.
So Jim Acosta has had his credentials revoked. Just one little point about that video that Sarah Sanders retweeted. It does appear to have been taken from the InfoWars website, which is one that is it's now banned from Twitter. It's not allowed. It's far-right, conspiracy-pushing website that a lot of people treat with disdain, frankly.
But you don't know.
It does appear to be, and a lot of people have done a lot of research. Jim Acosta himself says, "Don't believe the lies coming from the White House, believe in our freedoms." And yes, a lot of people are talking about how do journalists do this better so we don't get into this kind of situation. This Washington Post piece is a very interesting read, an opinion piece by Jennifer Rubin. And she's saying to the journalists, yes, cover all of Donald Trump's press conferences, but do not give Sarah Huckabee Sanders the time of day. She says she has no right to use her office to lie to the American people, let alone to violate the First Amendment. She has disgraced herself.
And on that clip that you've played there, you can see the two versions there, the actual version of what was happening in real time and the doctored version, which has been speeded up, slowed down to emphasise Acosta's move. That's a fact.
But
you
he
can
didn't
see
get
that.
back the microphone when she asked for it. That's a problem.
She's trying to snatch it out of its hands, it seems.
It's her microphone. You should give it back.
There we go. The final word. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and thanks to you for watching. Stay with us. More to come here on France 24.